The UK and other G7 countries are planning collective action against Russia and China if they threaten trade boycotts for political reasons, announcing a new body to deal with economic coercion. This is a response to the growing and strategic use of economic pressure by these two countries to interfere in the sovereign affairs of other states. For example, Russia weaponized Europe's gas supplies last year to counter support for Ukraine, while China imposed punitive tariffs on Australian wine and other products after Canberra called for an inquiry into the origins of COVID. Lithuania was also targeted by Beijing with sanctions over its position on Taiwan. These actions have caused serious harm to the economies and security of the affected countries, as well as undermining the principles of market economy and fair competition. To counter this threat, Rishi Sunak, the UK Prime Minister, will urge his G7 allies to establish a new coordination platform on economic coercion at the summit in Hiroshima. The platform will aim to identify future vulnerabilities and coordinate protective measures for vulnerable allies. It will also support them if they are targeted by economic coercion and seek to restore normal trade relations. Sunak will stress the need for bold and pragmatic collective action against hostile states that stop trading with other countries when they disagree with their geopolitical decisions. He will also emphasize the importance of working together and avoiding competition between friends to lift prosperity, innovate faster and outcompete autocratic states. The move is likely to anger Beijing, which has accused the US of economic coercion for imposing sanctions and export controls on Chinese companies. However, Sunak will argue that China is engaged in a concerted and strategic economic contest that challenges the values and interests of the G7 countries. The G7 countries have decided to take a collective stand against the rising threat of economic coercion by states like China and Russia that use trade as a weapon to interfere in the political affairs of other nations. Economic coercion is the use of trade measures such as tariffs, sanctions, boycotts or cyber attacks to pressure or punish another country for its policies or actions that are not in line with the coercer's interests. The G7 leaders have agreed to create a new coordination platform on economic coercion that will help them identify and address the vulnerabilities and risks that they face from such hostile practices. The platform will be advised by policymakers, businesses, and academics, and will act as an early warning system to alert the G7 members of any potential threats or incidents of economic coercion. The platform will also formulate where the G7 should take action when necessary, such as imposing countermeasures, providing support or assistance to the targeted country, or seeking diplomatic solutions. The G7 Coordination Platform on Economic Coercion is a response to the growing and pernicious use of coercive economic measures by China and Russia to interfere in the sovereign affairs of other states. Some examples of such measures are China's punitive tariffs on Australian wine after Canberra called for an inquiry into the origins of COVID-19. China's decision to halt trade with Lithuania after the Baltic country set up an office in Taiwan. Russia's stranglehold on European gas supplies last year amid a dispute over a pipeline project. Russia's invasion of Ukraine and annexation of Crimea in 2014, which triggered international sanctions. The G7 countries hope that by working together, they can deter and counteract the economic coercion by China and Russia, and uphold the rules-based international order that promotes free and fair trade. The G7 countries also hope that by showing solidarity and resilience, they can protect their own interests and values, as well as those of their allies and partners around the world. The G7 also needs to cooperate with China on broader global issues such as climate change, North Korea, the war in Ukraine, and the debt problems of a growing number of developing economies. China is not only a major economic partner for the G7 countries, but also a key player in addressing some of the most pressing challenges facing the world today. For instance, China is the largest emitter of greenhouse gases and has pledged to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. The G7 countries need to work with China to ensure that it fulfills its commitments and supports the global transition to a low-carbon economy. Moreover, China has significant influence over North Korea, which remains a nuclear threat to regional and international security. The G7 countries need to engage with China to find a peaceful and diplomatic solution to the Korean Peninsula issue. Similarly, China is involved in the conflict in Ukraine, where it has supported Russia's annexation of Crimea and its military intervention in eastern Ukraine. The G7 countries need to coordinate with China to uphold the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine and to prevent further escalation of violence. Furthermore, China is a major creditor to many developing countries, especially in Africa, which are facing debt distress due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The G7 countries need to cooperate with China to ensure that these countries receive adequate debt relief and sustainable financing. Therefore, while the G7 countries have legitimate concerns about China's economic coercion and human rights violations, they also have common interests and responsibilities with China on a range of global issues. The G7 countries need to balance their approach towards China and seek stable and constructive cooperation where possible, without compromising their values and principles.